Firstly, to the falling oil prices. Initially, when the oil price began to fall, nobody expected a dramatic oil price fall of 70% from 115 US dollar in the summer of 2014 and to less than 30 US dollar at the beginning of 2016. Many people and observers were initially believing it was a typical volatile oil price fall, but had totally underestimated that dramatic changes of the worldwide energy markets are underway, primarily due to the US shale gas and shale oil revolution, which were outbalanced, and even many disruption of oil production in many other producer countries, such as in the Middle East or in Africa, which were facing a lot of turmoil and unrest and other instabilities in their countries. Secondly, we had just the Paris summit on climate change, which had strengthened its efforts and the long-term political will for a decarbonized world. And it has certainly welcomed, in comparison with the rather disappointing Copenhagen summit we had before. However, from an energy point of view, there is a widening gap between environmental objectives which have been agreed and the energy megatrends being underway. We had just a new MIT study in the US which came out by analyzing the impacts and implications of the Paris Summit. And with the 95 predictabilities, they concluded that the global warming, even by implementing all the accords and agreements of the Paris Summit, the world climate change warming will be underway up to 2.7 to approximately 3% Celsius, far ahead and above the 2 degrees Celsius being agreed. So that means even if you take the best case scenario of a full implementation of the Paris Summit Accord, it can only be seen as a first step of a far more dramatic and drastic change of the world energy system based on renewables in the long-term future. And that means you need to have far more changes in respect not just to the coal consumption worldwide, but also of a dramatic decrease of the oil and gas production. Otherwise, the 2 degrees Celsius target is not being realistic, regardless what has been agreed in Paris. The third issue is certainly geopolitics. The dramatic fall of the oil prices reminds us again to the situation we had in the mid-1980s when the oil prices were dramatically falling. The oil production of Saudi Arabia increased at that time, which ultimately led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and its socialist empire. And here again, as we see today, the dramatic fall of oil prices is of course affecting many producer countries whose state budget are primarily being dependent on high revenue flows from the oil and gas production. And that's, of course, not just true for the Arab countries, but also for other producer countries. We see it now, like in Venezuela, which is facing dramatic crisis domestically. But we also see mounting problems in producer countries such as in Russia. At the end of the year, the huge pension fund in Russia will be already depleted, and then the economic problems will dramatically accumulate. If we take a longer-term future and a decarbonized world of energy supply into account, that means if we look that all these producer countries are not very much diversified of their economies, that means they are not prepared for a decarbonized world. And from a foreign policy perspective, quite in contrary to environmental views on climate change and a decarbonized world, I think from an energy point of view and a foreign policy point of view, we need rather a gradual, step-by-step transformation of the world's energy system, rather than a revolutionary change in short-term perspective, as it would undermine the political stability of many producer countries in the world, and that would definitely also undermine the world economic development and many also political and regional political developments in the world.